You think you're smart, don't you? Officer Leon Harper sneered, leaning heavily over the polished oak of the witness stand. The courtroom was suffocatingly still, every eye fixed on the confrontation. His voice, dripping with venom and unchecked arrogance, echoed off the high ceilings. You're nothing. Just another criminal trying to game the system to save your own skin. Naomi Scott stood dead center in the courtroom, her hands trembling imperceptibly against the seams of her skirt, but her eyes locked onto his with an icy, unyielding glare. I'm not playing a game, Officer Harper, Naomi whispered, her voice surprisingly steady, slicing through the silent room like a scalpel. I'm just finishing the one you started. Seconds later, she pulled out the one piece of irrefutable evidence he thought he had destroyed in the dark forever. The rain was coming down in angry, diagonal sheets over the slick asphalt of Interstate 90 in Chicago, obscuring the lane markers and turning the glaring streetlights into smeared, distorted halos of yellow and white. Naomi Scott, a 26-year-old paralegal, working grueling 70-hour weeks to put herself through night school at Loyola University Chicago School of Law, gripped the worn leather steering wheel of her 2015 Toyota Camry. Her knuckles were white. She was bone-tired, her mind numb from drafting endless interrogatories and sifting through dry corporate case law. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, and her only thought was the lukewarm chamomile tea waiting for her at her cramped third-floor walk-up apartment and the meager 4 hours of sleep she might manage before her alarm mercilessly went off again. Suddenly the rearview mirror exploded with blinding red and blue lights. The harsh, strobing glare painted the interior of her Camry in violent alternating shades of crimson and sapphire. Naomi's stomach plummeted into her shoes. She instinctively checked her speedometer, 62 in a 65 zone. She checked her blinkers, her side mirrors, the tight pull of her seatbelt across her chest. Everything was textbook perfect. Sighing, a knot of anxiety tightening in her throat, she pulled over to the muddy shoulder, the gravel crunching loudly beneath her tires. She rolled down the window, the freezing rain immediately biting at her cheek and dampening the shoulder of her blouse. She placed both hands firmly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, right where they could be easily seen. She knew the drill. She had read enough police reports to know exactly how quickly these encounters could escalate. Footsteps approached from behind, heavy and deliberate, boots splashing aggressively through the deep puddles. A high-lumen flashlight beam violently pierced the darkness of her car, blinding her for a disorienting moment before dropping to illuminate her pale, tired face. License, registration, and proof of insurance. Now! A gruff, baritone voice barked over the sound of the driving rain. Good evening, officer, Naomi said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the adrenaline violently spiking in her chest. May I ask why I was pulled over? Officer Leon Harper leaned in, his thick forearms resting aggressively on her wet doorframe, invading her personal space. He was a mountain of a man, his dark uniform stretched tight across his broad chest, a smug, contemptuous smirk playing on his lips. Harper had been with the Chicago Police Department for 12 years, a veteran who operated under the absolute, unchecked conviction that a badge was a blank check for absolute authority. He thrived on the fear of the citizens he was sworn to protect. You were swerving back there. Looked like a DUI to me, Harper lied effortlessly, not missing a beat. The freezing rain dripped from the stiff brim of his cap onto her door panel. Documents, before I decide to pull you out of this rust bucket and do this the hard way. Naomi frowned, her legal instincts flaring. I wasn't swerving, officer. The road is slick, but I maintained my lane the entire time. I haven't had a drop to drink. Harper's eyes narrowed into dark slits. He didn't like pushback. He absolutely despised it, especially from young women who looked at him without the requisite trembling fear he felt he was inherently owed. Are you arguing with me, little girl? I'm stating a fact, Naomi replied, her tone respectful but firm. Slowly, telegraphing her movements, She reached for her glove box. "I'm getting my registration now." "Get out of the car," Harper suddenly snapped, his hand dropping to the heavy black tactical flashlight holstered on his utility belt. "Excuse me." Naomi froze, her hand hovering over the latch of the glove box. "On what grounds? I haven't done anything wrong." "You have no probable cause to order me out of the vehicle." "I said get out of the damn car," Harper roared, the sudden explosion of rage catching her off guard. He violently ripped the exterior door handle. It was locked. Enraged, he slammed the heavy metal base of his flashlight against the glass, spiderwebbing the reinforced window with a sickening crack. "Step out, or I'm dragging you out for resisting a lawful order." Panic flared hot in Naomi's chest, but her rigorous legal training kicked in, overriding her fight-or-flight response. Comply now, survive the encounter, fight it later in court. She unlocked the door and stepped out into the freezing downpour. Before her feet were even fully planted on the wet asphalt, Harper spun her around with terrifying force, violently slamming her chest against the icy, wet metal of her Camry's roof. The impact knocked the wind out of her. He kicked her legs apart roughly, patting her down with an aggressive roughness that crossed the line from standard protocol to pure, punitive assault. "What are you doing?" Naomi cried out, her cheek pressed agonizingly against the freezing metal roof of her car, the rain plastering her hair to her face. "Shut up," Harper hissed directly into her ear, his breath hot against her skin. He reached into one of the deep pockets of his own tactical vest, his large hand intentionally obscuring the lens of his body camera for a fraction of a second, before miraculously finding a small, clear plastic baggie wedged deep between the driver's seat and the center console of her car. "Well, well, well," Harper sneered, stepping back and holding up the baggie filled with a white crystalline substance under the harsh, accusatory glare of his flashlight. "Looks like we have possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. You're going away for a long time, sweetheart." "That's not mine. You planted that," Naomi screamed, the sheer nightmarish injustice of the moment ripping the air from her lungs. Tears of frustration and terror pricked her eyes. Harper just laughed, a cruel, hollow, victorious sound that vanished instantly into the stormy night. He grabbed her wrists and ratcheted the cold steel handcuffs around them so tightly they immediately cut off her circulation, biting into her skin. "Tell it to the judge. Not that anyone in this city is going to believe a word you say over me." The next 48 hours were a living, breathing nightmare. Naomi was processed through the bureaucratic meat grinder of the Cook County Jail. She was stripped of her clothing, her dignity, and her identity, forced into an abrasive orange jumpsuit, and thrown into a freezing holding cell that reeked of bleach and unwashed bodies. She was surrounded by the ceaseless, echoing noise of despair. The official charge was devastating. Felony possession of methamphetamine, coupled with resisting arrest and assaulting a police officer. Harper had brazenly claimed she scratched his forearm during the arrest, a total calculated fabrication designed to secure a stiffer penalty. Because of her completely clean prior record and the swift intervention of her boss at the law firm, a seasoned, sharp-elbowed defense attorney named Marcus Thorne, who personally posted her exorbitant bail, Naomi walked out into the harsh, blinding daylight on Thursday morning. But her life, as she knew it, was in ruins. Marcus had looked at her with profound sympathy, but his hands were tied. She was immediately suspended from her paralegal job pending the outcome of the trial, and an automated email from the law school informed her that her admission was placed on administrative hold due to the felony charges. Officer Leon Harper had successfully detonated a bomb in the center of her meticulously planned life, simply because she hadn't cowered before his fragile ego. Sitting at her scratched kitchen table, staring blankly at the crumpled citation, Naomi felt a wave of crushing despair threaten to pull her under. It was her word against a decorated 12-year veteran of the force. The system wasn't broken. It was inherently designed to function exactly like this, to protect men like him and crush people like her. Harper's body camera footage from that night had conveniently malfunctioned during the exact 2-minute window he claimed to have found the drugs. The dashcam on his cruiser was pointed just slightly away from the driver's side window, capturing only audio where Harper shouted, "Stop resisting! Drop the baggie!" over and over, entirely staging a violent encounter that never happened. But Naomi Scott wasn't just another terrified victim willing to take a plea deal. She was a woman who spent her days analyzing case law, dissecting forensic evidence, and finding the microscopic fatal cracks in prosecution narratives. She opened her laptop and logged into the public access to court electronic records, PACER system. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but a cold, calculating fury drove her. If Officer Harper was comfortable pulling a stunt like this on a complete stranger in the dead of night, he'd undoubtedly done it before. Bullies with badges rarely acted out of a sudden lapse in judgment. They acted out of deeply ingrained habit. For 3 torturous weeks, Naomi barely slept. She survived on black coffee, cold toast, and pure spite. She built massive, color-coded spreadsheets, cross-referencing every single arrest Leon Harper had made in the last 5 years. She meticulously filed dozens of Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, requests for his internal affairs complaints, use of force reports, and mysteriously dismissed cases. The pattern she slowly uncovered was sickeningly clear. Over his 12-year career, Harper had an astonishing 27 complaints against him for excessive force, blatant racial profiling, and evidence tampering. Yet every single one had been quietly swept under the rug by his union representatives or dismissed by internal affairs due to a lack of corroborating evidence. He was a predator who specifically targeted vulnerable people, late-night shift workers, minorities, people who couldn't afford a high-priced lawyer to fight back. He thought Naomi was just another easy, helpless target to boost his arrest quota. He had no idea he had just pulled over a legal predator in training. One evening, while reviewing the police report for the 100th time, reading between the lines of his sterile cop speak, Naomi noticed a tiny, seemingly insignificant detail. The report stated the exact location of the arrest. Northbound I-90 shoulder, mile marker 43B, beside the abandoned rest stop. Naomi's pulse quickened. She grabbed her car keys and drove back out to the exact spot on the highway. It was bright daylight now. She parked her battered Camry on the shoulder, got out, and looked around, analyzing the geometry of the space. It was a desolate stretch of highway. But just beyond the rusted guardrail, about 50 feet away, sat an old, fenced-in commercial trucking way station. She walked over to the chain-link fence, the wet grass soaking her shoes, and squinted through the wire mesh. She followed the lines of the utility poles, bolted to the highest light pole, overlooking the highway shoulder with a perfect, unobstructed bird's-eye view. Was a rusted, discreet but very active CCTV security camera, belonging to the Illinois Department of Transportation, IDOT. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Naomi's face. Harper hadn't looked up. In his arrogance, he thought he was operating entirely in the dark. 6 agonizing months later, the day of the trial finally arrived. The air inside courtroom 302 of the Richard J. Daley Center was thick and oppressive, smelling faintly of lemon floor wax, old varnished wood, and the nervous sweat of desperate defendants. Judge Arthur Harrison, a stern, no-nonsense jurist, with a well-known reputation for leaning heavily pro-law enforcement, presided from the elevated bench, peering down critically over his half-moon spectacles. Naomi sat stiffly at the defense table. Her boss, Marcus Thorne, had graciously offered to represent her pro bono, bringing the full weight of his firm to bear, but Naomi had firmly insisted on taking the lead, with Marcus serving strictly as co-counsel to handle objections. If she was going to reclaim her life and clear her name, she needed to be the one to look Harper in the eye and tear his lies apart on the record. The prosecution, eager for a quick conviction, called their star witness. Officer Leon Harper swaggered into the courtroom, his dark uniform impeccably pressed, the brass buttons polished to a blinding shine. He exuded an aura of untouchable arrogance, practically strutting to the stand. As he passed the defense table, he shot Naomi a barely perceptible, deeply mocking wink. Under direct examination by the assistant district attorney, Harper proved to be a masterful actor. He painted a vivid, harrowing picture of the night in question, his voice laced with the perfect amount of professional gravity. He spoke with grave concern about the extreme dangers of impaired driving. He detailed Naomi's supposedly erratic, aggressive, and highly unpredictable behavior. When I asked the defendant to step out of the vehicle for a standard field sobriety test to ensure her safety and the safety of others, Harper testified, his voice smooth, authoritative, and rehearsed. She became violently uncooperative. She lunged at me, attempting to desperately conceal a plastic baggie containing crystal methamphetamine. I had to use necessary and proportional physical force to subdue her, protect myself, and secure the highly dangerous narcotics. "And your body camera, Officer Harper?" the prosecutor asked sympathetically, preempting the defense's obvious angle. "A tragic technical failure, ma'am," Harper sighed, looking appropriately frustrated and apologetic. The extreme moisture from the heavy rain that night caused a catastrophic short in the lithium battery pack. But as a sworn officer of the law, my sacred duty is to report the facts exactly as they occurred, regardless of technical malfunctions. The jury, composed mostly of older middle-class citizens who fundamentally trusted the uniform, nodded along sympathetically. Harper was selling the narrative perfectly. He was the brave public servant holding the thin blue line. Naomi was the desperate, lying criminal trying to evade justice. "Thank you, officer. No further questions," the prosecutor said, sitting down with a highly confident smirk. Judge Harrison looked down at the defense table, his expression unreadable. "Cross-examination, Mrs. Scott?" Naomi stood up slowly. She smoothed the front of her tailored, charcoal grey suit, took a deep, centering breath, and walked out from behind the table toward the podium. The courtroom fell utterly silent. This was the moment she had visualized for 6 months. She didn't look like a terrified defendant pleading for mercy. She looked like a predator that had just meticulously cornered its prey. "Officer Harper," Naomi began, her voice calm, projecting perfectly across the cavernous room, devoid of any emotion. "You testified today that I lunged at you, that I was physically violent. Is that correct?" "That is correct," Harper replied, leaning back comfortably in his chair, casually crossing his thick arms over his chest. He was trying to project absolute dominance. "And you testified just moments ago that you found the narcotics directly in my hand, as I was actively trying to conceal them from you, correct?" "Yes. You were trying to stuff them down the front of your shirt." Naomi picked up a pristine copy of his official sworn police report and approached the witness stand. "Officer Harper, could you please read paragraph 4 of your own sworn report to the court, the report you filed mere hours after the incident?" Harper frowned slightly, taking the paper from her extended hand. He read it silently, a microscopic tightening visible in his jawline. "Aloud, please, officer," Naomi commanded, her voice dropping a register. Quote, "The suspect was extracted from the vehicle. During a standard pat-down search for weapons, a plastic baggie containing a white crystalline substance was discovered wedged between the driver's seat and the center console." Unquote. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom gallery. Several jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Naomi tilted her head, maintaining unbroken eye contact. "So, which was it, officer? Was the baggie in my hand as I violently lunged at you? Or was it wedged deep in the center console while I was already standing outside the car?" Harper's face flushed a deep, angry shade of crimson. The situation on the side of the highway was chaotic and fast-moving. Both things happened in rapid succession. The written report is a brief summary. My testimony today is the complete, holistic truth. "I see," Naomi said smoothly, turning her back to him to face the jury. "So your memory of a chaotic event 6 months ago is remarkably more accurate than the sworn official report you filed 20 minutes after it happened?" "I know what I saw," Harper snapped, his carefully constructed facade of the polite, professional officer beginning to crack under the pressure. "You think you're smart, don't you? You're nothing. Just another criminal trying to game the system. Naomi stood dead center in the courtroom, her hands trembling ever so slightly, but her eyes locked onto his with an icy, unyielding glare. "I'm not playing a game, Officer Harper," Naomi whispered, her voice slicing through the silent room like a scalpel. "I'm just finishing the one you started." Harper let out a loud, scoffing laugh, glancing pleadingly up at the judge as if to say, "Can you believe the audacity of this girl? Look, Mrs. Scott, you can twist my words and parse syntax all you want. But the facts are the immutable facts. The drugs were yours. You attacked a police officer. I have the audio from my cruiser's dashcam proving definitively that you were resisting." "Yes, the audio," Naomi said, pacing slowly and deliberately back to the defense table. She let the silence stretch, a deliberate tactical pause taught in every first-year trial advocacy class. "The audio where you are screaming, 'Stop resisting' at the top of your lungs, while my voice cannot be heard, making a single sound. Tell me, Officer Harper, when your body camera so conveniently shorted out, did you also manually rotate your cruiser's dashcam exactly 15 degrees to the right, ensuring my car and your actions were entirely out of the visual frame?" "Objection!" the prosecutor yelled, jumping to her feet so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Speculation! Counsel is testifying and harassing the witness." "Sustained," Judge Harrison said sharply. Though he was now leaning far forward over his bench, his eyes narrowed suspiciously at Harper. "Ms. Scott, stick to the facts currently in evidence. I will not tolerate theatrics in my courtroom." "Of course, Your Honor," Naomi said smoothly, unbothered. She reached into her briefcase and picked up a small black USB flash drive. It felt heavier than a brick in her palm. It represented the weight of her entire future, her freedom and her vindication. "Officer Harper," Naomi continued, her tone shifting from aggressive cross-examination to an eerily calm conversational register. "Are you familiar with the Illinois Department of Transportation Traffic and Commercial Way Station Monitoring Systems?" Harper's confident, arrogant posture suddenly stiffened, as if he had been struck by lightning. The color drained from his face with terrifying, undeniable speed, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. His eyes darted frantically from Naomi's face to the tiny USB drive in her hand. I am broadly aware they exist," Harper stammered, his throat suddenly bone dry, his voice losing all its baritone authority. "Would you be surprised to learn that directly adjacent to mile marker 43B, the exact location where you pulled me over, is an active high-definition IDOT surveillance camera, one that operates 24 hours a day, regardless of the weather?" "Objection. Your Honor, the defense has absolutely not introduced any such video evidence during the formal discovery process." The prosecutor panicked, her voice shrill as she realized her star witness and her entire case was about to be obliterated. "Your Honor," Marcus Thorne stood up smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket. "The defense subpoenaed the IDOT footage 3 days ago, immediately upon learning of its existence through our independent investigation. We provided a certified digital copy to the district attorney's office at 8 a.m. this morning as supplemental exculpatory evidence under the mandatory Brady rule. If counsel hasn't checked her email before coming to court, that is a profound administrative failure, but it is not the fault of the defense." Judge Harrison looked down furiously at the prosecutor, who was furiously whispering to her young paralegal. The paralegal frantically checked a tablet, went completely pale, and nodded miserably. "The evidence is admitted," Judge Harrison ruled, his voice dropping an octave, ringing with absolute authority. "Proceed, Ms. Scott. Let's see this video." The fluorescent lights in courtroom 302 abruptly dimmed. Naomi plugged the USB drive into the court's multimedia system. A massive projection screen silently lowered behind the witness stand, hanging right above Officer Harper's sweating head. The video crackled to life. It was a high-angle wide shot in stunningly crisp 1080p resolution. The sophisticated camera completely cut through the dark and the heavy rain, illuminating the highway's shoulder like a stage. The irrefutable digital timestamp in the bottom right corner read exactly 2:14 a.m. The entire courtroom watched in breathless, agonizing silence as Naomi's Camry pulled over into the frame. A second later, Harper's cruiser pulled in aggressively behind her. "Let the record reflect," Naomi narrated clearly, freezing the frame with a click of the remote. "The cruiser's dashcam is pointing straight ahead, intentionally missing my vehicle entirely." She hit play again. The video showed Harper walking up to the car. It showed him violently yanking the door handle, then immediately smashing his heavy flashlight against the window, shattering the glass inward. Loud gasps echoed through the gallery. Several jurors physically recoiled in their seats. Juror number 4, an older woman clutching her purse, covered her mouth in horror. The video continued, merciless in its objectivity. It showed Harper dragging Naomi out of the car by her arm and hair, and violently slamming her against the roof. It was a brutal, entirely unprovoked assault. Naomi wasn't resisting in the slightest. The video clearly showed her going limp, terrified and compliant. Then came the kill shot. The high camera angle clearly captured Harper's broad back. It showed his right hand reach stealthily into his own tactical vest pocket. It showed him pull out a small white baggie and blatantly, casually toss it through the open door of Naomi's car onto the driver's seat. He then waited exactly 2 seconds, reached back in, grabbed the very same baggie, and held it up into the air like a twisted trophy. The silence in the courtroom was absolute and total. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a bomb having just detonated, leaving a vacuum in its wake. Every single person in the room realized they had just witnessed a horrific felony committed by a man sworn to uphold the law. Naomi paused the video on the exact damning frame of the drugs leaving Harper's hand, suspended in mid-air. "Officer Harper," Naomi asked softly, the absolute silence of the room amplifying her steady voice. "Is that you pulling crystal methamphetamine out of your own vest and planting it in my vehicle?" Harper was hyperventilating, his chest heaving under his uniform. Sweat poured down his face in rivers, ruining his polished, untouchable exterior. He looked exactly like a trapped animal. He looked wildly at the massive screen above him, then at the furious judge, then at the disgusted faces of the jury. There was nowhere to hide. There was no escape. That video is altered. It's a sophisticated deep fake," Harper shouted, his voice cracking hysterically, slamming his heavy fist onto the wooden witness stand in a final desperate act of intimidation. "She doctored it. You can't believe this garbage. She's framing me." It was subpoenaed directly from the state of Illinois secure servers, encrypted and securely hash-coded by the Department of Transportation. Naomi shot back instantly, her voice ringing like a bell. "Do you wish to perjure yourself further, officer? Or are you finally ready to admit that you are a corrupt, abusive cop who tried to systematically ruin my life simply because I bruised your fragile ego?" "I am a decorated officer of the law," Harper roared, losing complete control of his faculties. He stood up, pointing a trembling, furious finger at Naomi. "You're a smug, entitled little bitch who needed to be taught a lesson. You think you can talk back to the police? You think you have rights out there in the dark? I am the law out there." The absolute silence returned, heavier and more terrifying this time. Harper stood panting. He had just fully confessed to his motive, live on the stand, on the official record, in front of a horrified judge and jury. Judge Harrison's face was an expression of pure, unadulterated fury. His knuckles were white where he gripped his gavel. He didn't even bother looking at the prosecutor, who had completely buried her face in her hands, recognizing her career flashing before her eyes. "Officer Harper," Judge Harrison said, his voice terrifyingly calm, vibrating with tightly suppressed rage. "Sit down and shut your mouth immediately. If you utter one more single syllable, I will have you physically gagged in my courtroom." The trial didn't last another 10 minutes. The prosecutor, looking physically ill, stood up and formally withdrew all charges against Naomi Scott on the spot, citing a catastrophic and deeply disturbing failure of evidence and witness credibility. But the judge wasn't nearly finished. Judge Harrison slammed his heavy wooden gavel down onto the sounding block, so hard the wood actually splintered with a loud crack. "Missy Scott, you are free to go, with the profound, unreserved apologies of this court and the justice system you aspire to serve," Judge Harrison announced, his voice echoing. Then his eyes locked onto the witness stand like laser beams. "As for you, Mr. Harper, I have sat on this judicial bench for 22 years. I have presided over thousands of cases. I have never, in my entire career, seen a more blatant, disgusting, and utterly arrogant display of police corruption, abuse of power, and perjury." Harper opened his mouth to speak, desperate to salvage something, but the judge pointed a commanding, furious finger directly at his chest. "I said not a single word." "Bailiff!" Judge Harrison barked loudly. Two exceptionally large Cook County sheriffs immediately stepped forward from the back of the room. "Take this man into custody immediately. I am holding him in direct criminal contempt of court. Furthermore, I am formally requesting the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice open an immediate civil rights investigation into Leon Harper. And I am ordering a full, independent audit of every single arrest this man has made in his 12-year career." Karma didn't just casually knock on Officer Harper's door, it drove a battering ram right through it. The remaining color drained entirely from Harper's face. The arrogant swagger, the bullying smirk, the illusion of supreme power, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by the sheer pathetic terror of a man deeply realizing his life as he knew it was permanently over. The metallic click-clack of heavy steel handcuffs echoed sharply through the quiet room. But this time, they weren't going on Naomi's wrists. The sheriffs wrenched Harper's arms roughly behind his back, securing the cold steel tight enough to bite into his wrists, mirroring the exact pain he had inflicted on Naomi months prior. As they frog-marched the disgraced, ruined officer down the center aisle of the courtroom, a walk of absolute shame, he passed Naomi's defense table. He looked at her, his eyes wild and pleading, desperately looking for any shred of mercy or hesitation. Naomi didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She didn't offer a dramatic parting word. She simply looked right through him as if he didn't exist, calmly organizing her case files and softly closing her laptop. He was nothing to her now. Just another closed case file on her desk. The aftermath of the trial ignited a massive media firestorm. The damning IDOT video was leaked to the press by an anonymous source and played on a relentless loop on national television news networks. The Chicago Police Department, scrambling for damage control, immediately fired Harper, officially stripping him of his badge and his lucrative pension. Within a month, the FBI indicted him on a slew of federal charges, including severe deprivation of rights under color of law, felony evidence tampering, and aggravated perjury. Faced with the terrifying prospect of decades in federal prison alongside the very people he had put there, Harper's tough guy bravado completely broke. He wept during his allocution and took a harsh plea deal for 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, without the possibility of early parole. But the domino effect of Naomi's stand was even greater than bringing down one bad cop. Because of the comprehensive audit triggered directly by Naomi's case, over 40 prior convictions based solely on Harper's fabricated testimony were thoroughly investigated and overturned. Dozens of innocent men and women, whose lives had been quietly destroyed in the dark by his bullying, were fully exonerated and released from prison. As for Naomi Scott, she didn't just quietly return to her job as a paralegal. The Loyola Law School administration, catching wind of her spectacular, unprecedented pro se defense work, not only immediately reinstated her, but offered her a full-ride merit scholarship. When she finally walked out of the heavy brass doors of the Richard J. Daley Center that afternoon, stepping out into the bright, crisp Chicago sunlight, she stopped and